Hoist, short. Look at Hull coming screaming in for the rebound. Boston trying to body Wilson, and does. Sims back to Boston. Going back to work and dropping it in. An aggressive and effective Aaliyah Boston.
Picture this. You're watching what should be competitive playoff basketball, but instead you're witnessing something that looks more like a heist in broad daylight. Game 3 between the Indiana Fever and Las Vegas Aces wasn't basketball. It was daylight robbery, and every fan in that arena knew exactly what was happening. The Fever were leading. They were fighting with everything they had. And then, in a sequence so shocking it would make your blood boil, a series of whistles ripped the game right out of their hands like candy from a baby. What happened next would spark outrage across social media, leave fans screaming.
Handed from 3. Hull comes soaring in again. This uncanny knack. And cashes in.
Is on the upper left wing. Just got inside, circles around, pure.
Screaming at their TVs and exposed just how broken the officiating in this league really is. But here's the thing that'll make you even angrier. This wasn't just some random bad night for the refs. This was the culmination of something much darker, a pattern so obvious that even casual viewers started calling it out online. Let me paint you the picture of how this robbery went down. There's Aaliyah Wilson, supposedly the face of the league, throwing elbows like she's in a boxing match instead of a basketball game. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Boston can't even get a fair challenge recognized.
Aaliyah Wilson sets a screen where she extends her leg out, but of course they call the foul on Lexie Hull for Aaliyah Wilson's illegal screen. Then Aaliyah Wilson and Alyssa Smith totally foul Michaela Timpson, but there is no call. Could have took a 1-point lead going into half.
By officials who seem to have selective hearing when it comes to Indiana. The fans at Gainbridge Fieldhouse saw it with their own eyes. Social media exploded with clips proving exactly what was happening. Even the box score tells the story. The Aces didn't outplay the Fever that night. They were straight up handed that victory on a silver platter. But wait, it gets worse. In one particularly egregious sequence that had fans throwing their hands up in disbelief, Aaliyah Wilson sets what's clearly an illegal screen, extending her leg out like she's trying to trip someone. But somehow, someway, the whistle blows on Lexie Hull.
And a half. Now we're up by 3 and they call a foul that isn't a foul. So we don't get calls when we're getting hit, but the Aces get a call when nobody.
Wilson's illegal move. You can't make this stuff up. It's like watching a magician, except instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, these refs were pulling fouls out of thin air. Now, here's what really gets under your skin. This wasn't Indiana's first rodeo fighting 2 teams at once. From the very beginning of this series, the officiating has been leaning toward Las Vegas like a tree about to fall over, completely throwing the balance of competition out the window. Everyone who watched Game 1 saw it happening in real time. Vegas tried to claw their way back into that game at the free throw line, while Indiana's physical, aggressive defense was somehow treated like it was illegal in 12 different ways. The Fever would stand their ground defensively, body up like champions.
Steph, why don't you think you were able to find any flow, and when that was the case, what are you trying to do to jumpstart things, maybe on the defense?
Well, it's hard for us to find flow when there's a foul call every 10 seconds. I mean, it just really is. And when they're at the free throw line, we can't get up and down the floor. And that's a challenge. They were much more.
Teams are supposed to do. And somehow those possessions would magically end with the Aces shooting free throws. That set the tone for everything that followed. By the time Game 2 rolled around, this pattern had grown so loud you could hear it from the cheap seats. And the calls felt more and more lopsided with each passing minute. You want to know how bad it got? Listen to what Stephanie White had to say after the game, and you'll understand why Indiana fans are absolutely livid. She basically called out the entire officiating crew without actually calling them out, which tells you everything you need to know about how frustrated this team had become. The whistle fest continued into game.
Much more aggressive and physical defensively. We didn't counter that with our off-ball actions or with our back cuts. So they took us out of our comfort zone. I mean, offense is about rhythm, it's about timing, it's about spacing. We allowed them to do that.
Piling up every single quarter like a traffic jam during rush hour. What started as small frustrations quickly snowballed into this massive drag on Indiana's rhythm, with Stephanie White having to address it publicly after the game. By game 3, this wasn't just a pattern anymore. It had become an impenetrable wall that the Fever simply could not climb over, no matter how hard they tried. But the absolute nightmare sequence that had fans ready to storm the court happened in the third quarter, and if you didn't see it live, you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. Aaliyah Boston tried to challenge a foul call on Jackie Young, a completely reasonable request that happens dozens of times every game. Stephanie White motioned for the review. The bench was ready to go. But here's the kicker. The officials...
As the foul is called on Boston, and that will be number 2 on Aaliyah Boston.
You saw Indiana picking up full court pressure defensively, and if you're Aaliyah Boston, that's the one spot on the...
acted like they couldn't see or hear anything. They completely ignored the challenge attempt like it never happened. Seconds later, while Indiana is still trying to figure out what just happened, Chelsea Gray buries a three-pointer that sucked the life out of the entire arena. The crowd went from roaring with playoff energy to gasping in complete disbelief as they watched their team's lead vanish into thin air. 9 points, just like that, because the refs decided they didn't feel like doing their job that night. This wasn't just about the scoreboard swing, though that was devastating enough. This was about the message being sent that Indiana could play their hearts out, earn separation through pure effort and skill, and it could all be erased in the blink of an eye by officials who seemed to have their own agenda. Fans inside Gainbridge absolutely exploded, waving their arms and screaming at refs who just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. The clips of this entire sequence went viral almost instantly, with basketball fans breaking down
on the floor. You did not want to get a foul call.
And Stephanie White is trying to challenge it and did not call the timeout in time. Gray in the corner.
Frame by frame, how this ignored challenge completely shifted the momentum of a playoff game. Those same videos showcased a string of flops, cheap pushes, and constant elbows by the Aces that barely drew a glance from officials who were supposedly there to maintain fair play. Here's a 2-minute breakdown that'll make your head spin. Aya Wilson pushes Kelsey Mitchell in the back. Mitchell pushes back, and somehow the foul goes on Mitchell. Then Aaliyah Boston gets absolutely demolished by Alyssa Smith, and I mean demolished like you could see it from the upper deck, but there's no call. But when Aya Wilson gets breathed on wrong, suddenly the whistle comes out faster than a gunslinger in the Old West. Then Alyssa Smith gets a call for literally not even getting touched. They showed the replay to prove it, and she didn't get touched by another human being. This is the part that makes it feel less like oversight and more like an open favor to one team. Aya Wilson could throw her shoulder into Boston like she's playing linebacker. Defenders are getting tossed around the court without calls, and suddenly flailing your arms around became elite defense as long as you were wearing that Vegas jersey. Meanwhile, every single bit of contact from Indiana was treated like they were committing felonies out there. The result wasn't momentum created by superior talent or better execution. This was momentum handed over by referees who were holding their whistles like weapons, deciding the outcome of a playoff game from their striped shirts instead of letting the players determine it on the hardwood. But here's what makes this entire situation even more infuriating. While all this controversy was stealing headlines, it completely overshadowed what should have been the feel-good story of the entire playoffs. Lexie Hull put together a performance that Fever fans will remember long after the series ends. But instead of celebrating her incredible effort, everyone was talking about how the game got stolen. And that's criminal, because what Hull did that night was absolutely heroic. She wasn't even supposed to be on the court. After aggravating her back in Game 1 of this series, she came into Friday night listed as questionable. Her practice time was limited, her movements looked stiff during warm-ups, and you could tell from watching her that she was dealing with real pain. But instead of logging a few sympathy minutes to give her teammates a breather, Hull turned her night into something magical. She played through visible discomfort that you could see every time the camera caught her face, and still put up numbers that looked like they belonged to a perfectly healthy superstar. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal while shooting 6 of 10 from the field. Those 3 three-pointers she hit weren't just shots. They were lifelines every single time Vegas tried to edge ahead. They tied her with a franchise playoff record across 2 games with 8 total threes, which nobody saw coming from someone who was questionable with a back injury just hours before tip-off. What was most impressive wasn't just the numbers, though those were incredible. It was how she earned every single one of them. Every loose ball, every scrambled rebound. She threw her body into plays that most injured players would avoid like the plague. There were moments when you could see her face twisted with pain, yet she was still boxing out players 6 inches taller and chasing rebounds that should have gone to the Aces. She was diving onto the hardwood, wrestling for boards, and then somehow gathering herself to knock down clutch shots. It gave the Fever bursts of life every single time the officiating tried to deflate them, even when the Aces were living at the free throw line. Hull gave Indiana a fighting chance simply by refusing to let possessions die. That's why the crowd connected with her so powerfully. Fever fans knew exactly what they were watching. A player putting her body on the line because her team desperately needed her, playing through pain that would sideline most people for weeks. But here's the cruel irony of the entire night. While Hull was delivering the performance of her playoff career, all anyone could talk about afterward were the whistles that flipped the scoreboard upside down. Her incredible effort deserved to be the headline, but instead it got buried under layers of controversy and referee incompetence. Meanwhile, on the other side of the court, you had what might be the most embarrassing performance by a superstar in recent playoff memory. Imagine being the supposed face of the entire league, an MVP candidate who's supposed to dominate in moments like these, and going nearly 3 full quarters without making a single basket. That was Aaliyah Wilson's reality in Game 3. She opened the night with a 3-pointer that looked like a preview of the dominance everyone expected. Then the shots just stopped falling, and they kept not falling, and they kept not falling some more. By halftime, Wilson was a staggering 1 for 11 from the field. Let me repeat that, 1 for 11. She finished the night shooting 6 for 20, which translated to just 13 points on 20 attempts. That's not just subpar by her standards as an elite player. That's flat-out terrible basketball by any standard in the WNBA. Instead of bullying people in the paint like she's known for, instead of setting the tone for her team, Wilson was drifting out to perimeter, settling for contested fadeaway shots, and looking visibly frustrated as Aaliyah Boston forced her into uncomfortable positions over and over again. But here's what makes it even more frustrating for Indiana fans. Despite Wilson playing possibly the worst game of her career, Vegas still walked away with the victory. The Aces didn't need their superstar to play like herself because everything else kept breaking their way through questionable calls and favorable officiating. Jackie Young had to carry them with 25 points, hitting momentum-shifting shots whenever the Fever tried to make a run. Chelsea Gray added a steady 15 points, making tough shots when the offense stalled. Even Alyssa Smith, who's been inconsistent all season, stepped up and made plays on both ends when the Aces needed them most. So while their supposed franchise player was clanking shot after shot, everyone else pieced together just enough offense to ride the wave of favorable officiating back into control of the game. Wilson missed 11 consecutive shots at one point, but it didn't matter because the refs were there to bail them out whenever things got tight. What makes this even more insulting is how the media covered Wilson's disaster performance. Her box score told a crystal clear story of struggle, but plenty of outlets either glossed over her shooting woes or shifted the narrative to praise Vegas's depth and balanced scoring. What got completely lost in all of this? The reason Wilson was so ineffective in the first place. Aaliyah Boston was hounding her every single possession, denying easy looks and forcing her into the exact types of awkward shots that make efficiency impossible. When a league MVP shoots 30% on 20 attempts, that's not just an off night. That's elite one-on-one defense that deserves major recognition. Boston did exactly what you're supposed to do against the opposition's best player, and she did it to perfection. But instead of that being the story, Wilson still managed to impact the game through physical play that almost never drew whistles. There were elbows underneath, undercuts on box-outs, and careless contact with Indiana players that somehow escaped the attention of officials who were calling everything else. The truth is simple. Indiana bottled up Aaliyah Wilson completely. They executed the perfect defensive game plan against the league's most dominant player, and they still lost because favorable whistles softened every blow. That's not a statement victory for Vegas. That's a protected escape that rings completely hollow. Now all eyes turn to Gainbridge Fieldhouse, where Indiana has one final shot to flip this entire narrative on its head. Sunday afternoon isn't just another playoff game. It's pure survival for the Fever. Game 4 represents their last chance to prove they belong against a franchise that's been gifted every possible break along the way. Down 2-1, beaten up by injuries, and forced to overcome more than just their opponents on the court, the Fever enter knowing that one loss ends their season completely. But here's what Vegas should be worried about. Becky Hammon has already started setting the stage, complaining about physicality from the Fever and raising concerns that officiating might actually be fair this time around. Think about that irony for a second. After 3 games where calls fell almost exclusively for Vegas, now the coach of the 2-time champions is acting like she's bracing for the refs to finally even things out. It tells you exactly how comfortable the Aces have become with favorable conditions and how much pressure they're feeling walking into Gainbridge, knowing 17,000 fans won't sit quietly through another repeat of Game 3. Because Gainbridge will absolutely not be quiet. That building becomes a thunderstorm when the Fever get momentum, and it's an environment that Vegas hasn't handled well all season. Even Hammon admitted they don't enjoy playing there, which gives Indiana their biggest weapon heading into an elimination game. The Fever's plan is obvious. Push the tempo immediately, get Boston touches in the paint without Wilson getting bailed out at the stripe, and establish Kelsey Mitchell early after her rough Game 3. Hull needs to build on her incredible performance despite her injury, because her energy could swing not just the scoreboard, but the entire spirit of the roster. Vegas has visible cracks, even as defending champions. Wilson's confidence is shaken after getting completely locked down. Jackie Young is carrying too much of the offensive load. Their depth looks fine at home, but hasn't faced a playoff environment like Gainbridge at full volume. The Fever didn't lose Game 3. They had it stolen from them. They built a lead, played championship-level defense, and watched referees turn the game into free points for Las Vegas. Game 4 is about more than just survival now. It's about exposing how hollow those Vegas wins really look when the whistles don't bail them out. If Hull fights through pain again, if Mitchell gets hot, if Boston keeps punishing Wilson inside, and if 17,000 fans turn that arena into absolute chaos, this entire series shifts. Indiana's season isn't over. It's just about to get much, much louder